The morning at the Healer house began with an unusual silence. Bluey woke up to find Bandit and Chili not playing as usual, but sitting on the couch, staring blankly ahead. Their eyes were slightly open, but they lacked their usual playful spark, and their smiles seemed unnaturally wide, frozen. A faint, unfamiliar, sickly sweet scent like something old and damp emanated from them. When Bluey tried to approach Bandit, he let out a low, raspy chuckle that wasn't like his usual laugh. It was a hollow, repetitive sound that carried no joy. Chili also giggled softly, her laughter just as eerie, contagious, and chilling. Bluey and Bingo watched their parents with growing unease. They tried to draw them into a game, but Bandit and Chili merely raised their paws slowly, attempting to hug the children. But their touches were cold and limp. Their gazes remained fixed on something distant beyond the room. Soon, Bluey and Bingo began to notice the same thing happening outside. Neighbors passing by the house also wore those frozen smiles, their laughter quiet and constant, their eyes lifeless. They moved slowly but purposefully, as if driven by some shared incomprehensible objective. The entire neighborhood was sinking into an ominous laughing silence. Houses stood open, and within, silhouettes flickered, emitting the same soft, raspy chuckles. The virus didn't make them aggressive in the usual sense. It stripped them of their individuality, leaving only this empty, infectious joy. By evening, Bandit and Chili rose from the couch. Their movements became slightly quicker but remained jerky. They slowly reached for Bluey and Bingo, their frozen smiles stretching even wider, revealing teeth that seemed too sharp. That same strange, sickly sweet scent wafted from them. Their laughter filled the room surrounding the children. It was insistent, demanding, urging them to join. Bluey and Bingo desperately tried to escape, but the doors were locked. And from every crack, that quiet, hollow laughter seemed to emanate. The final shots of the episode show Bandit and Chili slowly enveloping the children in their paws, and the screen began to flicker. The last desperate attempts of Bluey and Bingo to scream were heard, and then their voices too transformed into those quiet, raspy, repetitive chuckles. The episode abruptly cuts to a close-up of 4 pairs of eyes, now all utterly lifeless and black, but their mouths stretched into identical, eerie, frozen smiles. The final chuckle echoes into the void. The morning in the Healer household began as usual, filled with sunshine and laughter. Bluey and Bingo chased each other around the yard, while Bandit, their dad, sipped coffee on the veranda, watching them with a smile. Chili, their mum, joined him after finishing her morning tasks. Everything was perfect and familiar, but then an unusual parcel appeared on the porch. There was no return address, just a plain brown box as if hastily packed. Curiosity won out and Bandit opened it. Inside, to Bluey's utter delight, lay a brand new shiny figurine. It was a Labubu bright pink with its pointed ears and characteristic toothy bared grin. Bluey immediately snatched it up, hugged it close, and named it Smiley. She was thrilled. Smiley instantly became her shadow. Wherever Bluey went, Labubu was there, on walks, during games, even sleeping beside her on her pillow. Her joy was infectious and her parents saw nothing wrong with it. However, very soon inexplicable things began to happen in the house. First, it was minor disappearances. Bandit's favorite pen, Chili's hair clip, Bingo's toy block. No one could figure out where these items went. Then, Bluey began complaining about quiet whispers coming from her room at night. She'd whisper to her parents that Smiley was talking to her, but Bandit and Chili dismissed it as a child's vivid imagination. One night, Bandit woke up feeling thirsty. On his way to the kitchen, he heard a strange scratching sound coming from the living room. Pausing, he cautiously peered into the gloom. In the faint moonlight, he saw Smiley the Labubu sitting on the rug. Its head was turned as if looking directly at Bandit, and its toothy grin seemed unnaturally wide. Bandit blinked and the figurine was motionless again, seemingly in the exact same spot. He convinced himself he was just tired. But the unease grew. Bluey's behavior began to change. She became withdrawn, often retreating to a corner of the room, whispering to Smiley. Her usual boisterous games took a back seat. Now she preferred to sit still, stroking the figurine. At times, her eyes would look strangely vacant and her smile somehow mechanical. The tension peaked when Bingo, wanting to play, tried to take Smiley. For the first time, Bluey reacted with unseen aggression. She growled, snatched Labubu away and clutched it tightly, a cold, inhuman rage flaring in her usually kind eyes. Bingo cried out in fright. Chili and Bandit were genuinely scared. They decided the toy was having a bad influence on their daughter. Later that night, while Bluey was fast asleep, Bandit carefully took Labubu from her grasp. He intended to hide it away. The moment his fingers touched the plastic, he felt an icy coldness pierce his hand. And the figurine itself momentarily felt soft, like living flesh, pulsing beneath his touch. Labubu's grin seemed to widen even further, and its glass eyes briefly flashed with a dull red light. Bandit thought he heard a faint, mocking chuckle. Stunned and frightened, he dropped Labubu. The figurine hit the floor with a dull thud, but then to his horror it slowly swayed and stood upright. Its eyes were fixed directly on Bandit, and its smile, it was no longer just a smile. It was the grimace of a predator. Bandit, consumed by panic, snatched Labubu and without a second thought tossed it into the outdoor rubbish bin. He returned to the house, breathing heavily, and told Chili everything that had happened. They decided never to mention it to Bluey. The next morning, Bluey woke up. She immediately reached for the spot where Smiley should have been. When she realized it was gone, her face twisted not just with sadness but with something darker and more sinister. She slowly got up, walked to the window, and looked directly at the rubbish bin where Bandit had thrown Labubu the night before. A slow, chilling smile spread across her face, almost an exact replica of Labubu's grin. And in her eyes there was that same cold, inhuman glint. From that day on, Bluey was never quite the same. Sometimes when she plays, her gaze becomes empty, and her laughter sounds too sharp, almost alien. And if you look very closely into the shadows of her room, you might just catch a faint pink glimmer and two glowing points, watching from the darkness. They are waiting. There's a lost Bluey episode only spoken about in hushed tones. They call it The Night Bus. It was never officially released. Only fragments of memory and a few screenshots remain. The episode began with Bluey and Bingo waiting with Bandit at a bus stop. It was already late. The sky was dark and the streetlights flickered. They were supposed to catch the last bus home. The air felt heavy, thick, as if the world was holding its breath. The bus pulled up. It looked normal, at first. Bluey and Bingo climbed aboard, waving at the driver, but he didn't wave back. He didn't even move. His face was hidden under the brim of his cap. Bandit sat with them for a few minutes, then smiled and said, "I'll see you two at home." He stepped off the bus. The doors hissed closed, and the bus pulled away. Bluey and Bingo looked out the window, but the streets didn't look right. Buildings were twisted, street signs blurred. People on the sidewalks didn't move, they just stood, staring. The further the bus went, the darker it became. Inside the bus, the other passengers were silent, staring forward, their faces wrong, smudged, like old paintings left in the rain. Bluey squeezed Bingo's paw. "I want to go home," she whispered. The bus didn't stop, it just kept driving, faster now. The lights outside grew dimmer, and the shadows inside the bus grew longer, stretching, reaching. One figure stood up, slowly. Its arms were too long, its face an empty gaping hole. It began walking toward them, step by step. Bingo cried, Bluey shouted, "Stop the bus!" No one moved, not the driver, not the passengers. The thing came closer, its hollow face just inches away. And then, the bus jolted to a stop. Bluey grabbed Bingo's paw and ran. They pushed past the silent passengers, fell out into the street. The town was wrong, silent. The buildings loomed at odd angles. The sky was a deep, choking black. No stars, no moon. Only the faint sound of footsteps. Many footsteps, approaching from all sides. They ran, down alleys, around corners. But the city twisted endlessly. No way out. The episode ended with Bluey and Bingo standing under a broken streetlight. Alone, shivering, listening to the footsteps growing louder, closer. The screen slowly faded to black. No credits, no music. Only the sound of a bus engine idling in the darkness. It was a typical rainy day at the Gila house. The rain drummed against the roof, keeping Bluey and Bingo from playing outside. Bingo sat drawing in her room while a bored Bluey wandered through the house. Suddenly, she stopped in the middle of the living room. From beneath the old wooden floorboards covered by a rug came a faint scratching sound. Bluey knelt down and listened closely. The sound came again, this time with a soft tapping, as if someone was gently scratching the wood from inside. "Hello," Bluey whispered. In response, a barely audible but distinct whisper echoed back, seemingly from the very depths of the house. The words were unintelligible, but the tone was soft and comforting. Bluey smiled. She had a new friend. She began spending more and more time on the floor, pressing her ear to the boards. Her parents noticed. "What are you playing, Bluey?" Chili would ask, seeing her daughter whisper to an unseen companion. "I'm playing with my friend under the floor," Bluey would happily reply. Bandit and Chili exchanged glances but chalked it up to childish imagination, glad that Bluey had found something to occupy herself. As the days passed, Bluey's behavior grew stranger. She stopped paying attention to Bingo, ignored calls for dinner, at times even refusing her favorite games. Her entire world narrowed to her conversations with the friend under the floor. She'd whisper secrets to it, laugh at its very funny jokes, as she called them, even though Bandit and Chili heard nothing. At night, Chili began hearing strange sounds. Quiet, persistent rustles, creaks, and taps coming from beneath the floor of the children's room. Sometimes she thought she could faintly hear a dry, hushed chuckle that chilled her to the bone. She mentioned it to Bandit, but he assured her it was just an old house or her own tiredness. One day, Bandit found Bluey trying to pull up the edge of the rug in the living room. Her little paws frantically clawed at the edges. "What are you doing, sweetie?" he asked. Bluey turned around. Her eyes, usually full of mischievous sparkle, were cloudy and vacant. "My friend wants to come out and play," she whispered, her smile strangely forced. A chill ran down Bandit's spine. He led Bluey away from the rug. Later that night, when everyone was asleep, Bandit quietly went to the spot where Bluey had spent so much time. He carefully lifted a corner of the rug. Beneath it were old, darkened floorboards, nothing out of the ordinary. But as he leaned closer, he felt an icy draft, smelling of dampness and something putrid. And then he heard it. A quiet, raspy whisper coming from somewhere beneath the house. It wasn't Bluey's voice, and it wasn't comforting. It was filled with malice and hunger. Bandit immediately dropped the rug, his heart pounding. The next morning, Bluey was quiet, almost silent. She wasn't running or jumping. She just sat on the floor, her ear pressed to the boards, humming a faint, unfamiliar tune. When Chili called her for breakfast, Bluey didn't stir. Bandit approached to pick her up, but when he touched her shoulder, Bluey jolted sharply and looked back. Her eyes were completely black, devoid of pupils, and they reflected a grotesque, predatory grin that twisted her snout. "He's very hungry," a voice rasped, utterly unlike Bluey's. Chili screamed. The camera slowly pulls away from Bluey, lying on the floor as she continues to hum monotonously. From beneath the floor, a louder wet scratching grows, punctuated by slurping sounds that echo throughout the healer house. The sounds grow in intensity, then abruptly cease.